Good day. Hello, everyone. I am Holly Hoagland. I am the Principal Research Lead at APQC for our Process and Performance Management Research Group. I will be hosting and moderating this panel discussion of a group of thought leaders on this new topic that has been coming up lately in our research, which is looking at this changing face of process management. So one of the things that we do here at APQC every year is we conduct an annual survey to kind of understand what are the pressing challenges and the priorities of process and performance management professionals as they move into the new year. And in this year's survey, what we found there was an almost overwhelming consensus by process professionals that they needed to change their capabilities to stay relevant in their organization. So that's what our panelists are going to discuss today. We're going to go through understanding what's driving this kind of overwhelming need. What are kind of some of the impacts? So what is the scale of this change and this need? And then finally, we're going to kind of wrap up with discussing what is coming for these changes. So in other words, what are the changes that need to be made for process teams, and how can they get ahead of those changes before they do lose relevancy? So today, I want to start the meeting by introducing our panelists and thought leaders. Thank you all for participating in this discussion today. As I introduce you, just give us a couple of brief sentences about who you are and why you're so interested in this topic today. So I'm going to start with Jamie Capehart. Jamie is an Organizational Development Manager at the Goodway Group.
Hi, everybody. I have been a longtime proponent of process. I have about 20 years experience, and I started in healthcare. So it's really exciting to me because I've left the healthcare industry and am in the digital advertising, and I've been in the automotive industry. And so the differences between the industries are, well, sometimes there's not a life at stake in the new industries, so process management is a little bit different. So I'm interested to see what everyone else is working with and ready to move into the future.
Thank you, Jamie. Our next panelist is Dr. Matthias Kirchberg. He is the co-founder and co-CEO of BPMD.
Yeah, thanks, Holly, and hello, everybody. I have basically built my whole career on process and process management. I was for many years the CEO for IDS Shear Americas, a company just focused on process management, well known for their ARI software. Then I moved on and was for 6 or 7 years even as a managing director at Accenture, responsible for their BPM activities. And a couple of years ago, I co-founded BPMD, again, an organization focused on the discipline of process management. And during all that time, I also kept my links to academia a bit. I've always been curious in that area. I've been teaching for almost 18 years at the University of Pennsylvania, class around value-driven process management, and at a couple other universities, at Widener, for example. And I've published 11 books in that field, so it's a natural topic to think about what's now next and how business process management is changing.
Thank you, Matthias. Our third panelist is Clay Richardson. He's the co-founder and chief accelerator at Digital Fast Forward.
Hey, thanks, Holly, for having me and the rest of the group. So as chief accelerator at Digital Fast Forward, a lot of what I focus on is helping companies jumpstart innovation around new technologies like robotics automation, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, and really helping teams transition from kind of what I would consider legacy BPM to more modern ways to apply the technology to digital use cases. And so before launching Fast Forward, I ran research at Forrester Research around BPM innovation, design thinking, and also focused on robotics automation. So I've, like the other panelists, I've been in the industry for about 20 years and have had a front row seat in different roles, ranging from running professional services for BPM software vendors to leading BPM consulting practices where, we would be in the trenches with clients on multi-year, multi-million-dollar BPM initiatives. And in my current role at Digital Fast Forward, a lot of what we work on is focused around Pega's platform. Pega Systems, one of the leading vendors, their platform, and helping clients unlock the potential there. And so we actually received funding from Pega through their venture arm at the end of last year. And so we've really been rolling up our sleeves, helping clients get the most out of the platform. Thank you.
Thanks, Clay. And last but not least is Carla Wolf, Chief Architect at The Art of Process.
Hi, I'm really looking forward to this. I find all the other panelists quite fascinating. I have several decades of performance improvement consulting under my belt, but I am really very laser focused now on what I consider the sweet spot of process, because I think the power is immense in optimizing an organization. And my passion is around architecture, making the work transparent inside the organization, but most importantly, finding a way to engage the people in the organization in making things better. And I think process does that.
All right. Well, thank you all. And again, thank you guys for participating in this panel. I really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to your insights. So what we wanted to do was start the conversation looking about kind of the current state. So what is going on in the business world? How is it impacting process? And kind of setting the stage for what is going to be changing. So the first question we have for all of you is, so what elements of today's business environment are directly impacting the role of process management? So does anybody want to go first?
Yeah, this is Clay. I'll go first. I know this is a topic that I researched a good bit while I was at Forrester, because when I started at Forrester, that was about 8 years ago, BPM was really at its height, right? So it was right after the market crash, the recession, and I think that would be considered the renaissance of BPM, right? Everybody was really adopting the methodology, adopting the practices, and so we saw from 2008 to, I would say, about 2011, where BPM in its classic form was really becoming more widely adopted. And so I got to see it, go through that cycle, but also I got to see, over the last 4 years, BPM, the methodology, the technology, really go into the sentiment, having negative sentiment, where a lot of teams are looking at it saying, hey, it takes so long, it's really hard. And I think what has changed, the biggest element that I see is around just the speed of business, right? It's, I like to think of the time that we're in as the great upheaval, right? We talk about the Great Recession or Great Depression. Right now, we're going through a great upheaval, both on the political side, on the business side, society overall. And I think what we're seeing is, as part of this, is there's an expectation to get things done significantly faster in companies, right? So I think that's a big piece of it. But also the other driver that's changing this, I think, is just digital, right? I think if we look at it, that's the number one driver that is impacted the BPM environment. And I see this in surveys, I see it in a lot of different studies, but what that translates into is the expectation that we can get things done much faster, right? And so it's the speed where organizations aren't willing to wait. CEOs, CIOs aren't willing to wait, 9 months to a year to see results from a BPM initiative. They're looking to get results. In some cases, clients we're working with, they're saying, can I get a big impact, a big win in a couple weeks, right? Mm-hmm. And that's, to a certain extent, is unrealistic, but at the same time, I think that's the big drivers, that digital piece and then the speed piece, just given the environment that we're in right now. So I don't know what the other panelists.
So I think these are all great points, and I believe we all agree on that. Maybe just to add a couple of aspects or sub-aspects to what you mentioned. I think the whole topic around here fast-changing customer requirements, and that clients want to have everything best yesterday, every day something else, and to manage that in a agile way. That is a key requirement for organizations, and of course for process management. And well, the clients on one side, on the other hand, government and regulators, the whole topic around compliance and achieving compliance with legal requirements while still meeting those fast-changing customer requirements. That is another area where I see a big impact on how we do process management today. And that leads to a situation where Gartner published a couple of years ago a report where they said, okay, nowadays only 13% of organizations meet their yearly goals. All the others try to struggle their way through that. So that whole topic around an effective execution of strategy and a real effective way of working towards those goals, that has become a huge challenge, and with that also a big opportunity for process management.
Agreed.
I agree with both of you. I think it's interesting, this is Carla, I think it's interesting that there's no way a traditional org chart or traditional structure is fitting this, disruptive environment. The changes are just blazing, they're just going so quickly. And I agree with you, Clay, the perception that process is rigid is, I think, what has to be flipped, because it doesn't really matter if you're moving to a digital enhanced environment or leveraging technology. There's still business running. There's still things happening in that organization in a sequential order that needs to be addressed. And that's one of the things I love about moving BPM out of, process and into architecture, and thinking about the neural pathways of the organization. Like, how is the work running through and across the entire organization? And one of the things I'm discovering is that it seems to be the work groups that I'm working with are actually the millennials, because they're technology savvy, but they also love working in social collaborative environment. And it seems that if you can provide them with architecture through process, some type of a framework, they are actually very capable of applying the technology to how the business is running. So that's another interesting dimension I'm loving.
Me too, Carla. Yes, I totally agree. I went from a traditional work environment to a completely virtual company, and managing process, where you can't lay eyes on it's a challenge. And being able to provide that framework has done the same. We have a lot of millennials in our company, and getting that together, getting the hierarchy together has worked wonders.
Yeah, it seems like if you can provide the rules to the game, they can then, like you say, Clay, apply the technology. They love being collaborative and working together. So it's definitely changing. I don't think I have any sense of what the answers are, but I have a feeling, just because I'm out there working with people, it is not going to look anything like it does today.
The collaboration, in my mind, is so incredibly key, and it's something that we that in the past we really didn't do a lot of. It was more of a committee would get together and decide what the process would be, and you didn't always have the right stakeholders. And now it's just far more collaborative, and people feel a lot more engaged in process management, and that's the direction that we've definitely been going.
And the framework, when you think about it, is really it's showing you what's happening in the organization. If you take like an APQC classification or the frameworks that I work with, where you can actually see what's happening in the organization, it doesn't matter whether you change your org structure or change your org chart or have to add a new line of business or new technology. It doesn't matter, because the processes can move. They're fluid. They can move with the business.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that leads to a very important and interesting situation that process management that used to be more a set of tools and techniques that you used within a project or an initiative. That becomes more and more a management discipline by itself, a management discipline that needs to be implemented and organized through what I call a process of process management, because otherwise you cannot deal all those changes as you just described it.
No, that's absolutely true, and you can just empower people basically. If you can provide that framework, that architecture, that way of thinking, you can empower people to take their needs in technology and implement it themselves. And what's interesting, especially like when you think about the millennials, they're wanting fast change. They get it. They understand the power of that. They can't wait for a traditional structure or, like you said, Clay, a 9-month business improvement project. It doesn't work that way. They need it more on a quicker cycle.
Yeah, and process management and the related process governance can then form something like a value network around the organization that can be used to overcome all these inflexible structures and these traditional ways of doing things. So I think that's a huge opportunity if you put the right flexible and agile process governance in place.
Agreed.
Yes, it's really interesting because the analogy I like to use or kind of frame when we talk about where BPM started from, at least for us, right? Everyone, all the panelists kind of started in BPM, 20 years ago, have been around for a long time. And I like to use this analogy of, back then that was like Kitty Hawk and the Wright brothers, right? So we were, on the plane, trying to figure out how to make the plane fly, and now the era we're moving into is more like, Cape Canaveral, 1969 and the Apollo crew going into the moon, right? And even really it's probably more like SpaceX is where we are right now, where it's just all about like speed, small compact teams moving fast. And the analogy that I use is, if you look at Howard Hughes, when he had the contract to create this massive airplane during World War II, he used a lot of the same methodology and techniques that, were really begun at Kitty Hawk back in 1918, right? And we have to think about that when, you look at the story of Howard Hughes and when he created that jet or plane, he built it with wood, right? It was the wrong approach for such a large plane, but he was using those same methods and techniques. And in the same way, we in BPM, as we start to move into this kind of SpaceX era, we have to adapt our methodologies to get to that goal of getting into outer space, so to speak, and the speed that's needed. And so I think that's a big part of it is just, we're in a different time 20 years later, and, our methods and techniques do need to be adapted to the current reality, right?
I love what you're saying. I love what you're saying. It's like one of the thoughts I typically find myself up against is when you were talking about the 9-month cycle, you take even a lean Sigma or a Sigma exercise, it's going to take forever, but you can take those same principles, like you just said, you can get the right people in the room, have a collaborative, journey mapping experience, do a quick value add, no value add assessment, and right away you can expose opportunities or problems much more quickly. So you're thinking about how you're applying the tools is just different. It's more agile. It's more quick. The cycles are bigger.
Yeah, I think that whole topic around rapid improvement and still leveraging some of the existing tools and principles, but then apply them in a way that you get very quick from the beginning on actions and results out of that, so that you have a really rapid improvement approach. That is very key for our time. That's also an area where we have invested a lot of time and research to really combine those traditional approaches with the needs of this fast-changing world. And that leads to the fact that you basically think also about how do you digitize the process management activities themselves. Well, in the past, you had your brown papers and your sticky notes on it, but this is then an information you cannot reuse. You cannot right away translate into action. If you have a flexible process repository environment that allows you to publish the results right away, to collect feedback, so to transfer such a workshop result right away into a collaborative work environment, that makes things fast. And then go above the traditional approaches of efficiency improvements, but think about how do you move the customer experience forward through customer journey planning combined with process-driven innovation. Think about how to drive digitalization in a value focused way. So think of the outcomes. These are topics that have become key and that move that whole discipline of process management on a new level.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is just such an important point, because what we're starting to see teams do well is kind of that hybrid, kind of not abandoning BPM and BPM methods, but really bringing in some of the new methods and combining them. So, for example, we'll see teams use design thinking as a way to do this rapid brainstorming across a collaborative group and be able to come up with, 100 ideas around how to drive process innovation, and then out of that be able to do very rapid prototyping. And so you'll see this marriage of design thinking to jumpstart action with BPM to be able to actually do the fast prototyping to get results. So I think it's a very good point that you're making, Matthias.
And that's why the architecture, I still believe in just the architecture of the organization. So being able to see it from a process perspective through a framework gives you the opportunity to not silo up in your thinking, in your design and in your prototyping, but instead think, wait a minute, what's the impact to the entire organization, which used to only be visible through, traditional structure, traditional meeting, who's the person in charge of that. Now people can see like a X-ray right through the organization. So when they're working on these things, they do have the opportunity to do a quick cycle. They know what they're impacting. They know who else they're touching in the organization when they're trying to make an improvement. It's super cool.
I think that topic around using BPM to create the necessary transparency, and to do that now in a digital format, here leveraging enterprise architecture and business architecture tools, that is a very important point that you make there. That's is really what lays the foundation of a modern business process management. And I think in that context, it's now becoming more and more important to have that visibility on two levels: on an operational level, so the classical process modeling, leveraging here BPM and all those things, but also on a more management level, where you need that transparency around, well, what are my high impact processes that I need to focus on? There exists solid research that a company only competes with about 15 to 20% of their processes. 15 to 20%, 80+% are commodity processes. If you innovate and optimize there, it doesn't bring you a lot of benefits. You need to know where are the 15% to target on, and to have a tool environment that shows you that, and that shows you how that changes when you have to adjust your strategy. This is a level of transparency that has become really, really key for organizations.
Thank you all. I think you guys have all made a lot of really great points, and I think that great disruption and all the conversation about technology is a great segue to our next question, which is, we are in a state where a lot of advanced technologies are coming to the forefront at different stages of maturity. How do you guys feel that these advanced technologies, things like automation, natural language processing, machine learning, and AI, are impacting process management's work?
Yeah, I can maybe speak to that. I know I work very closely with the technology. This is Clay. And I think it's really interesting, because I think technology is helping, but it's also hurting at the same time. No surprise, right? I think in a way, you know, when we look at this need for speed and really more interaction with the customer, technology is really helping in the sense that, you know, you have these technologies that can speed up delivery, right? Speed up transformation or digital innovation. So you're seeing things like low-code platforms where there's evidence, concrete evidence now that it speeds up development. You know, again, when I was at Forrester, we spoke with dozens of companies at all different sizes that gave us feedback that, yes, they're using these platforms to get less technical developers involved, but also to deliver real applications in very short periods of time. So you're seeing technologies like low code come into BPM teams to get results very quickly. And the same thing with robotics. I mean, the classic RPA robotics use case right now is all about minimizing the need to do long integration cycles, right, where we're trying to build up some sort of API library or doing a bunch of web services. So bots give you the ability to do, you know, poor man's integration is what it's sometimes called. So in a way, these technologies are really good, but on the other side, they also create problems, right? I mean, it's the shadow IT is really, you know, the negative side or downside of low code, where teams essentially are going out and creating a Lotus Notes scenario all over again, where you have thousands of Lotus Notes applications. You know, we're seeing that kind of come back up. And so you're also seeing with robotics where teams are creating robots, but there's no governance, right? Because this business team might decide, hey, I want to spin up a robot because my IT team is taking too long to do some of the integration I want. And when you see that, we had one client that we worked with where that happened. You know, the business went out and spun up a bunch of robots. And once the IT group started deprovisioning some of these systems, they realized that the business had created robots to access these systems to do some very low-level, simple integration. And so you still have to have governance. So I think, you know, the need for speed is great, but I think, as Carla was saying, you still have to think about the architecture when it comes to these technologies and how they really support business outcomes. So it's definitely an exciting time, but also, you know, it's very, very risky and challenging too.
Yeah, Clay, I think that's a real great point. I just talked a few weeks ago with the head of IT of a huge financial firm, and she said they run into huge problems through RPA. Her predecessor had 2 years before launched a very aggressive RPA initiative. We need to bring robotics into everything possible, and after a year, they had more than 1,000 bots up and running. But after 2 years, that ended in a huge chaos because they underestimated that processes changed very often, so the bots didn't get the right fields. They underestimated that they fixed a bottleneck in one area, but then created a much bigger one in another area that led all in all to lots of negative effects. And after 2 years, the situation was so bad that they stopped all 1,000 bots and started everything again from scratch, started with understanding their processes, understanding where that type of automation makes sense and where you better launch something else. The topic of governance that you bring up is so important. I currently work with a big financial organization. They went also through a digital transformation, as they call that, but then suddenly they said, oh, how do we now use that new agility? We cannot have one department change something in the system that will create issues in another one. So we need to organize that. And suddenly that whole topic around governance roles, about governance processes, about collaboration models comes up. And these effects around the automation and the robots themselves, this is something where I see that many organizations underestimate that and address it too late.
I just had a funny thought listening to that. It was, I was thinking about how we started with, 9-month process projects. Now we have, 2-year automation projects instead. It's all the same thing. You still have to understand where are you at, what's your delta, and where are you going. And it doesn't matter whether it's a business process or automation. But the cool thing about process, or at least understanding how the work happens, is that it definitely makes you a better partner with, your technology vendors. If you understand what you're doing, they're going to have a better understanding of what you're doing. And this is not my wheelhouse, but it's kind of funny. It's fun listening to this.
Yeah, what's really fascinating to me is that a lot of what's happening right now is the technology is driving, right? So, in the past, it would be the business has a problem or a challenge, and the business articulates that, and then the technology is kind of selected to support that. But what you're seeing now is really the technology is moving so fast, and the capabilities around the technology moving so fast that CIOs, CEOs, COOs, these executives are saying, like, we don't have time to wait for a perfect business problem that this technology can apply to, because we know everybody else is moving to this. I think robotics is a perfect example of it, right? Where it's the technology is so compelling, so to speak, right? The hype around it is so hot that a lot of executives are saying, we know we need it. We don't know what we need it for yet, but we know we need it. And so yeah, I know it's kind of weird, but what we get pulled into a lot of times are conversations around help us find the right use cases, right? Because people, they kind of get the technology, but they don't really understand the real value. And so they're in this investigation mode. I guess if you think about the hype cycle, right? RPA, AI, a lot of these technologies are right in the hype cycle where it's going up. And people are just trying to figure out the use cases, which is valid. That's kind of where we are in the market. But my word of caution to teams that are starting to look at these technologies is, you definitely need to walk and kind of crawl to really make sure you have an understanding of the value that these capabilities deliver. And then you need to make sure you do find the right use cases, because we'll see teams just, they'll zoom in on a specific use case that's not even right. I think what you were saying, Matthias, like you've chosen the wrong use cases, you're trying to apply this technology, and then you have to back up, right? And so that's kind of, it's a weird scenario right now, because I think we want to have business leading technology, but the technology is now leading the business. All right, go ahead.
I think that's really well said. And what happens is the strategy I'm actually working with an organization right now where I'm I feel like they've been pulled away from who they are, their core strategy, their core purpose, because they're chasing the technology, and they're going so fast they actually have forgotten who they wanted to be when they grow up.
Yes,
They've
and I
lost their
think
core purpose.
that topic of the usage scenarios that Clay you just mentioned, that is not only relevant for all these new technologies like RPA or blockchain or so, that is also very relevant for mature technologies. I had a few months ago a QA meeting with a consumer goods company, and they said, "Oh, we are very proud. We have now the great repository built up. We have over 600 models, all following our standards. We have only one problem. Last month, not one person looked at them." And I smiled and said, "Well, then you have a pretty big problem, because then you have a bunch of stuff in your repository and nobody wants it." And they got really upset and said, "Well, now we have created the transparency that you always suggested. Now we have it and nobody uses it." So, well, people are not sitting around and have nothing to do but figuring out what to do with your new digital assets, with your new process models. You need to define the usage scenarios. You need to define how do you use them to train people? How do you use them in process improvements? How do you use them to support your governance, and so on? So you need to describe how people get value out of it, and then you don't have just a technology there, but then you have a technology that delivers value, and that outcome-driven view on these new technologies and the existing ones. That is what is so.
But thank you, Matthias. I think you guys all have made some really, really great points that have led into so we've got this environment that is, crunched for time. We have a lot of focus on customer centricity and how can we focus on both our internal and external customers, that kind of disruption in the world around us. But I think you guys also made a great point where we're talking about the technology, which is we have a lack of strategy, but we also have all of this technology leading organizations. So how do all of these kind of changes in the business impact process management and its potential role in the organization?
Yeah, maybe that's a topic I have lately worked quite a bit on. And as I indicated before, I think process management moves more and more to become something like a discipline of strategy execution, of moving here strategic goals into people and technology-based execution. Does that fast and at minimized risk. So the role as a strategy execution engine, I think this is how process management is and will more and more be positioned. And linked to that, the roles will change. And when I published the first time about 20 years ago that I think we will one day see there will be something like a chief process officer, people started laughing, because especially here in the US, it was even an exception when you had a manager role responsible for some process-related topics. Now that has changed completely. Here, Stevens Institute has done some research in LinkedIn. They already found more than 900 people with a title of Chief Process Officer. I have several clients that moved their CIO to a CPAIO, to a Chief Process and Information Officer. So BPM will move in an organization to really become a top group with a top management leader that helps spreading that value network into the company.
I want to say that's a really, I think I've kind of been talking about this with a lot of our audiences, that this is kind of a time for process management to kind of take that step into that strategic position. But a lot of organizations struggle with engaging leadership and making that business case. Do you guys have any suggestions or advice for organizations kind of making that leap?
I think very often the huge challenge is that the traditional business process management practitioners, they lead their discussions with the methods and tools and technologies, and they try to position and sell an RPA and a repository and an architecture, and that's not what top management is really interested in. I think we need to turn around and position and sell the outcomes. We create the transparency necessary to take fast and well-informed decisions, the transparency that you need to balance efficiency and quality, to balance agility and compliance, to balance internal alignment and external integration, or to help figuring out where innovation makes sense and where do you want to conserve existing practices. And if you explain how those outcomes are improving the performance of your organization, then you get the attention of top management. If you explain the methods and tools behind it, that's like explaining somebody how the watch works when he or she asks for the time.
Yeah, the other way, to start from the other end, I agree with everything. And the way, you know, of course, we had success, and I think collectively everyone would say that at my last organization, was we kind of went from the inside out. We flipped what process really meant in the organization. We empowered everybody to build and architect. They were involved in building the framework for the organization. They truly understood how the whole place worked. And it was interesting because then that got the attention of senior leadership. So then when they went to make an important decision or a different decision or a strategy decision or started thinking about who we wanted to be strategically, that was a critical input for them. So in other words, we did it the other way. We flipped it. We did it from the inside out.
I agree, Carla, 100%, and that's what I was going to say earlier, Matthias, when you were talking about, you know, moving into that process chief role, is that strategy, culture, and all of that is at the heart of everything, and that's what we're focusing on right now too, is doing exactly what Carla said, and starting it from the individual contributor, letting them do the work, letting them understand so that we can get senior leadership involved.
Okay, thank you guys. So we've kind of wrapped up kind of that there's a lot of work out there. The current state is kind of rife with potential. There's a kind of a balance of some of the traditional BPM, but we're facing a lot of changes. So then the last part of this panel conversation we wanted to focus on is kind of how can process management teams get ahead of the curve and take advantage of this opportunity. I'd like each of you to kind of give us a little insight to, in your opinion, what do you see are the biggest challenges that process teams are going to be facing over the next 3 years?
Yeah, maybe I'll start off. I mean, I think the biggest challenge is going back to what Matthias was looking at, is, you know, the process of process change, right? And I think the biggest challenge is going to be shifting from this concept of needing to build a center of excellence to more of what we would refer to as a learning model or a learning organization, right?
Right.
Where it's not so much that we're building towards excellence, because I think in this environment, you know, we talked about this earlier, that, you know, it's really about agility, right? It's really about being able to adapt very quickly to new circumstances. And I think this new model for process management is really about a learning organization where we're constantly learning and evolving, but there's no such thing as, you know, true process maturity, because we're constantly moving in a different direction. And I think one of the books that I've been reading and working with some clients on, or I should say books, that I've been reading, is around systems thinking, right? And it's all about how do you build a learning organization that can look broadly, constantly take in new information, and really apply that to these changes. And so I think that's a big shift in the business process world, is being able to say, you know, we're not going to build up these, you know, centralized centers of excellence, but we're going to move more towards a distributed learning organizations where everybody is constantly questioning, challenging, and adapting. And so I would say that's probably a big idea, but we're starting to see some companies move in that direction with their process teams.
Yeah, and I think
actually, that's exactly what we did at my last organization, and I love everything you said. And I would only finish with the last sentence, and empower them to do something about it. So it's one thing to learn and to understand, right? But then they have to have, how do I take the next step? So building in a model of governance that allows them to say, step A, step B, step C, what do I do with this idea? And just breaking down these rigid walls and silos about, you start a business case at, in June of the previous year, and then you're looking at, 18 months, it doesn't fly. Empowering people to learn, and then what do I do with the information? How do I make a difference quickly?
Yeah, I think once you have defined a process of process management, and that's another topic we have been working on for many years to come up with a reference architecture and a reference structure for that. Once that is clear, then it's the very logic next step that you think about, okay, what are the roles that you need in order to make that process of process management happen? That leads automatically to the related process and integrated data governance. Needs, of course, both to be aligned. And then you automatically come to the point that you need to add new digital tools, combine them with some of the traditional principles. As soon as you have that clear guideline and structure of that process of process management in place, things fall together. And once a company has incorporated and understood and bought into that concept, I think they can very successfully move their BPM capabilities to the next level.
And they see it too. It's really true what you said. They can then see it, right? You said get your data aligned with your processes, get your knowledge aligned with your processes. So you're managing all of that holistically, and the results speak for themselves. That's when they really truly get it and get engaged. They understand at that point.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and that leads then, of course, to a situation that the required skill sets shift a bit compared to the traditional Lean Six Sigma expert who knew all the statistical tools back and forth. Now it's more about knowing the business impact of those new digital technologies like RPA and blockchain, knowing how to digitize the process of process management itself through here automation environments like Clay mentioned, through repository environments, and through integrated here process management environments that help to identify focus areas and shows how they shift over time so that you can take a decision. So it becomes a much more well-rounded set of skills away from this purely mechanical efficiency improvement skills.
I think you're right. Go ahead, Clay.
No, I was just going to say, just with that, I was staring at the question and just thinking in terms of, if we get in a time machine and go 3 years ahead into the future, what do I think will be the biggest challenge if, let's say, process management starts to fail and it's abandoned by companies? What will be the reason? And I think the primary reason will be because process management teams weren't able to gain credibility around supporting customer-facing problems, right? If 3 years from now, process management teams are only seen as these are just the back office guys and they only focus on, changing these back office processes, I think that's going to be a challenge over the long term, right? So I think that's where we're seeing, you know, a big problem right now, but I think 3 years out, you know, we as process management teams and process management leaders will have to have a credibility deposit, if you will, with the business that, hey, we can come in and actually support these customer-facing processes and drive change there. So, and still, we can't drop the back office processes. I think that's still important, but there has to be this focus on being able to support customer-facing processes.
And that's
well, I think the way you think about that is to move it to strategy, because if you've got strategy, if you're thinking strategically about BPM, what you're really saying is, I'm no longer I'm not the expert in the content, I'm the expert in a methodology, and what that means, kind of like we were talking about a chief process officer, is we have to give it away in order to get where we want to go. We have to train and coach and lead and empower and engage others to think like this. And I often feel like if you can get people thinking in process, even if they're not doing it precisely, right, that they're at least thinking in terms of process. Now we're, like you said, a learning organization. We're teaching organizations how to think. We're teaching them how to think in a process-based way. So I think one of the biggest changes we need to make is to become consultative. We need to be able to show others how to do what we do, and then we hold the role for ourselves in the realm of governance and architecture and training and the management over that, to get everybody, I call it clean process, get everybody engaged in how the place works.
Yeah, and I think coming back to that point, Clay, that you made about becoming more customer-centric, I think that is really something which is already today very crucial. Initiatives that improve customer experience, so that use customer journey planning, bringing new ideas through the related design thinking. That is what business process management has to bring to the table. Process-driven innovation becomes more and more important. All those new companies that pop up everywhere are founded based on process innovation, so that to combine that customer and market drive with process management, that is a key area, and we said a key skill sets that future process managers have to bring to the table.
I think you guys have all made some really great points, and we kind of touched on the next question, which is what are those skill sets that are going to keep process management thriving as we're talking about this time period? And I don't want to just limit it to what are the ones that they need to add, but what are also some of those foundational ones? So what should they, which ones are still foundational to the core of what process management is, and which ones do you guys see that they need to kind of hone and add into their skill set over this time?
Well, in starting with hiring, I'm, a huge proponent. We talk a lot about change management and growth and fixed mindset. So when you're hiring people, make sure that they are of that mindset, that they are able to change and innovate and not stay so stagnant.
Sounds like some of those kind of soft skills of flexibility are definitely necessary. What are some of the other ones?
Listening, consultative listening. If you want to base it in, like, what do we hang on to, the 5 whys, some of the basic BA skill sets. For process, I think we actually have to start being more open-minded to how the business sees itself. Where is the innovation? Where are the thoughts? What are the ideas? And so once again, we're just giving them the methodology. We're just showing them how to do it, but finding a way to help them get there by being better listeners, asking a question after a question after a question, but helping them come to self-discovery around what's the right answer.
Go ahead, Clay.
No, I was just going to say, I think a big part of the foundational skills that remain relevant for facilitation, right, is, I think now more than ever, I see customers, this political landscape being very challenging to navigate. Sometimes I'll go into a client meeting with executives that are trying to figure out, what are their next steps around BPM, and I end up stepping on a landmine where I get my foot blown off, right? And so I think the key important foundational skills that we need to keep and really hone now more than ever is being great facilitators, right? Being able to help organizations navigate this new landscape around process, right? Process innovation, the new technology, all of that. I think facilitation becomes a top foundational skill that needs to be proved by all of us.
Yeah, and I think that basically the four buckets. We talked here about the technology skills. You need to know how this new RPA and blockchain and things work and how they can provide value to the business and how you can figure out where. So the technologies related skills, that is something which are really key for a successful process manager, of course, and that is sometimes still forgotten, the people skills, or what you guys just mentioned around listening, communication, collaboration skills. Very important, the times that the process architect sits in his or her dark room and works there are over. So people skills very key. Of course, some of the traditional process skills you need to have, be able to model, you need to be able to analyze process models. They're still relevant, but relevant in the digital and in the people context. So you get that information in a different format, and you need to use that to encourage collaboration, to encourage digitization. And the fourth bucket that I think becomes now very key is a bucket around more management and strategic skills. How to structure a strategy that you break it down into the 7-8 value drivers that you need to get right. How to link that to your processes so that you know where the 10-15% high impact processes that you need to focus on. How to set up the right projects that make that strategy happen, so that you really can show and prove how process management moves the company forward.
Holly?
Yes, ma'am.
I guess the thing that I think I'm starting to notice and understand with again, going back to the concept of, the millennials, the next generation, is they're not really looking inside their own company for answers anymore. They have access to too much information. So they're looking outside of their companies. And I would say that if process management teams want to stay relevant, they need to go with them. They need to explore the companies that have innovative process structures or engaged cultures in process, because process itself can enable that future state. If we understand the delta, if we understand where we are now, we can look at other organizations and we can model our processes after those organizations. So I think it's important that we, not use our toolbox to keep looking inside, but use our toolbox to look outside at other organizations and how they're doing it that are innovative.
Kind of taking that mind shift, which, as we've moving on, being able to do that. I know one of the hardest problems for any kind of best practices, adoption, process management, continuous improvement is getting that ability to look outward and being a little bit more comfortable with that. So it sounds like that's one of the key points that you're making as well, right there, Carla?
Yeah, exactly. We have a toolbox. We tend to keep using our tools inside and expecting to get a different result in the same way. And so the tools are still important, but it's the mindset. It's leading people who have a different mindset. They want to look outside. They want to be innovative. They want to be creative. They want to watch what's happening, and they have access to all that information. So that's what they want to leverage.
And that kind of leads.
I also have to throw in a challenge that I've seen with many of those millennials. They like going outside, they like being creative and all that. but if you don't put a little bit of structure around it, they find it very challenging to direct all this energy the right way and come up with the right results at the end. So to combine some of, let's say, the traditional, more analytic, more structural thinking with this dynamic and innovation that they bring to the table, I think that is a key topic around how to manage that within a BPM organization.
Right, which is why our organizations need to become more about the structure, the architecture, and the governance, so that when those ideas come back, we have a way to integrate those. So our role, I think the BPM role inside the organization is shifting. It's more to the architecture, not to executing the toolbox. So that, yes, I agree with you.
Well, and that leads to the kind of the interesting and our second to last question, which is, BPM has had a traditional, well-developed toolbox, but we are faced with a lot of anomalies these days, customer centricity, speed, just to name a couple. What are some of those methodologies that process management should look at adopting to keep relevant over those next couple of years?
Yeah, I know.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know Matthias was mentioning customer journey mapping and modeling. I think that's critical, right? Is in terms of being able to establish that outside in view of the process, right? So customer journey mapping, I think, is a top one. But also, it's design thinking, being able to have design thinking as a methodology to jumpstart innovation. So if you're looking at process innovation or teams that are looking at process innovation, really design thinking is where you want to make sure you have that in your toolkit. But one other methodology that we've been working with clients on is what we call innovation sprints. And it's really around Google's design sprint approach, which brings together design thinking, prototyping, and agile development all into one methodology. And so we're seeing BPM teams or process improvement teams using this kind of combined design sprint approach to get working product out much faster, right? And so it's not so much divorced from a full enterprise, process change, but it's really a way we've seen a methodology that allows teams to jumpstart innovation with some of the new technologies such as low code, but still be connected to strategy. So I think those are kind of the new methodologies that I see that BPM teams are starting to embrace, and I think we'll need to have as a key ingredient over the next 3 years.
Carla, were you about to say something as well?
I was just going to say that I love the journey mapping comment, by the way. I almost think for the teams that I'm working with, it's in a way, if you just start with journey mapping, it makes the whole conversation and dialogue about process just easier in general. But again, I would say if you're in a leadership position of a BPM team, kind of going back to this idea of thinking strategically, it would be thinking of the system and systems thinking. And of course, my background was with, our win of the National Baldrige Award. And I know that it transformed the organization to be able to see ourselves as a system rather than as departments and silos. And that's really important when building out process and process architectures and understanding how the organization works. So if you're in a leadership position, just really keeping that holistic view, gaining skills around keeping the whole view.
And I think all points mentioned are really spot on. The system thinking, design thinking, of course, the customer journey planning, as I mentioned before there. I would just add, I think it needs to be something like an integrated customer journey planning, because Clay, I think you made before a great point. If you just think about the customer journey and then don't care anymore about the operations behind it, you may end up in a situation that you just demonstrate to your clients how bad your operations are. And that's a situation, of course, you want to avoid. So that's integration between the front end, the customer journey, and then here efficient and effective back-end operations. That is very important, and that needs to be part of that journey mapping approach. Point I focus heavily on, and I would like to add a couple of skills. Here, I think something around standardization becomes more and more important, and that sounds like a very old topic. We need to standardize and harmonize, but even if you look on a more academic level on this topic, there is very little literature about approaches how to standardize, and it's not that simple. It's not just about defining how a process should look like. Then you need the governance around it. You need to define on which level do you standardize. Do you standardize on a regional, on a local, or on a global level? So there are lots of different dimensions, and to have a good approach of doing that is very key in our digital world. If you cannot standardize, it is a nightmare to become agile and to roll out the related technology. So standardization, I would add as another important topic, and directly related to that, what I like to call a value-driven digitalization, that it's not just about understanding how to implement a tool like Pekka as Clay mentioned.
Yep.
It's not just the tool, it's really about thinking, how do I get value out of it? I've seen in so many situations that I got called in and said, yes, we have bought that workflow engine and now nobody wants to have it. My first reaction is, well, then you have already started the journey at the wrong end. If you don't, if nobody wants it, you have not understood what people need, and you have just bought a piece of technology. And to have there a more outcome and value-driven view, and understand what the challenges are, and then align the technology with it. Here, usage scenarios, all that. That is another, I think, very important skill for the future.
It sounds like one of the things, I'm trying to remember which one of you guys said it. I think it was Carla, that's like, once you get your processes standardized and your framework set, you manage to get your measures together and your knowledge information all together. Once you have that structure, that kind of standardization and the structure is still necessary because it sets you free a lot of ways to then build on these other methodologies and layers to give you that agility to problem solve and move things quickly. Is that kind of the gist of what you guys are all seeing there as far as kind of how this plays out?
I think it's a good summary.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys. We have one last question for all of you today, and that is just: do you have any closing advice for process teams as they're making these adjustments? How to proactively get ahead of the challenge? We hadn't heard from Jamie for a while, so I wanted to start with Jamie. Do you have any specific advice?
Thank you, Holly. Yes, actually, getting your, we've already kind of talked about a lot of it, but just making sure that your front line is included in all of these things, and that you've given your people enough time and you've given them, the engagement and the empowerment and all of that to be involved in this. One of the things that we struggle with too is that we're moving so fast day to day, and they have, jobs, what they call outside of their process work, which, and obviously I'm sure all of our opinions, it's the same thing, but just giving them the room to execute on their ideas, their innovation, the empowerment, and all of that. As long as we've got support, they can take us way into the future.
Clay, what are your closing advice or thoughts for organizations struggling with these?
Yeah, I think the main thing is really trying to get a future vision of what the program needs to look like, right? Like I mentioned at the beginning of the panel discussion, we're going through the great upheaval, right? I think this is the time to start assessing, and imagining what will my program look like in 3 years, right? And so I think, my advice, this may sound a little off the cuff in terms of advice, but my advice is to use a tool like design thinking to reimagine the program, to frame the challenge around how might we redesign our BPM program to deliver greater value around innovation, things like that. I think now's the time to reimagine your program and the potential larger impact it can deliver, right? Because we know programs are not going to look the same as they look today. It's not going to be a centralized group managing everything. It's not going to be a CPO, a chief process officer, right? It's probably going to be a chief digital officer who's really trying to direct processes and in some cases blow up processes. And so you have to try to imagine what does that landscape look like that you're going to be operating in, and really begin to build the capabilities now around that, right? And so that's my advice, is just reimagining the program and where you'll be in the next 3 years.
Thank you. Matthias, what about your closing advice for our teams?
Yeah, I think it's important to see process management as a real management discipline, and that leads us to the topic of how to implement it through what we have been calling now the process of process management. And if you have a good idea how such a process of process management should look like in the context of your specific organization, then you have a perfect foundation for your process management journey. And then it's about to find outcome-driven, simple and pragmatic approach to implement and roll that out. And there the overall recommendation is to do it in a way that you immediately apply the capabilities that you build around your process of process management. Don't spend 6-12 months setting up the organization and then see what happens. But look at the current challenges and develop that process of process management in that context, and demonstrate right away that you add value and that you bring outcomes for the organization. And the whole effort is really be coordinated by a top executive, if you now call it a chief digital officer, as Clay mentioned. I like that too. Or if you call it chief process officer who is a value scout in the digital world, that's semantics. But to have a top executive person driving that and making that the management discipline of strategy execution for our digital world. That is the future of business process management.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you all for participating in this conversation. It has been wonderful. You guys have all got some great insights and some really great guidance for our teams as they're moving into the future. So again, thank you all, and I hope you all have a good day.